Hey there, fourth grade. Okay, you guys are starting a unit on drawing conclusions. And so I am going to read you a story today and we're going to draw some conclusions while we read. So when you draw a conclusion, you use some clues from the text to make an interpretation. You might decide what's going on during what you're reading, or you might make a guess about what's going to happen next. Okay, but you can't just guess. You have to use clues from the text to help you draw the conclusion. Okay, it's usually just when the book makes you start thinking something, or I like to say the author starts whispering to you, and you just kind of know what's happening, even though the author doesn't say it out loud. So I'm going to read you a book called The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi. It's written by Chris Van Allsburg, who wrote Jumanji and The Polar Express. Those are two of his really famous books. You probably have read some others. And this one is, you can see, going to be very interesting. It's one of my favorite books of Chris Van Allsburg's. Okay, normally when we do a visual tool, we read the story and then we do the visual tool after we read. But this one is one that we do during the story. Okay, so when we start thinking something, we just stop and we make our conclusion cloud. Okay? All right, so here we go. That's why instead of using the PowerPoint, I'm going to use a little dry erase board today. Okay? All right, here we go. So I think you'll really like this story. Okay, let's see. Here we go. All right. I want to make sure you can see the pictures really well. 6 times Miss Hester's dog Fritz had bitten dear cousin Eunice. So when Miss Hester received an invitation to visit Eunice, she was not surprised to read, P.S. Please leave your dog at home. On the day of her visit, Miss Hester asked young Alan Mitz to stay with Fritz and give him his afternoon walk. All right. As soon as Miss Hester left, Fritz ran into the parlor. He loved to chew on the chairs and shake the stuffing out of the pillows. But Alan was ready. All morning long, he kept Fritz from sinking his sharp little teeth into the furniture. Finally, the dog gave up and fell asleep, exhausted. Alan took a nap too, but first he hid his hat under his shirt, hats being one of Fritz's favorite things to chew. All right. Now, my brain is thinking something right now, and I'm thinking that this is not the first time that Alan has been a dog sitter. He's probably done a good bit of dog sitting before. What do you think? So I'm going to stop here and make a conclusion cloud. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take my board sideways, and I'm going to draw a little cloud over on one side. And the cloud is like a thinking cloud, right? And I kind of like to think of it as kind of looks like my brain, okay? All right, so in the cloud, I'm going to write what I'm thinking. Alan is an experienced dog sitter. Y'all know what experienced means? That means he's done it a lot. And he's good at it. Okay? All right, so that's my thinking cloud. But what clues from the text made me think he was good and experienced at being a dog sitter? Well, I'm going to draw a box. Here, I'm going to make sure it's big enough. And when I draw a box, I like to think anything that's going to go in the box comes straight from the book. Okay? All right, so the first thing was he kept Fritz from biting the furniture. So that was the first thing he did. He kept Fritz from biting the furniture. So that was my first clue that, this is not the first time he's done this before, right? So I wrote that there. That was one clue. I'm going to draw an arrow to the thinking cloud, the brain cloud, right? Okay, and then there was another thing that happened. Do you remember? He hid his hat under his shirt while he took a nap so that Fritz couldn't get it, right? So I'm going to write that down too. He hid his hat under his shirt. I think I'll just write he hid his hat while he took a nap. That way you won't have to wait so long on me. Okay, and then I'll draw a box around that. And I'll draw an arrow to my thinking cloud, right? So 2 clues from the book made me think that Alan was an experienced dog sitter. Okay, you see how it works? All right, so we're going to move along and read a little bit more. Okay, an hour later, I'm going to erase this writing while I'm reading this part, and I'll show you the picture in a minute. An hour later, Alan quickly awoke when Fritz gave him a bite on the nose. Fritz was a biter, wasn't he? The bad-mannered dog was ready for his afternoon walk. Alan fastened Fritz's leash, and the dog dragged him out of the house. Walking along, they discovered a small white bridge at the side of the road. Alan decided to let Fritz lead the way across. It's a pretty bridge. Some distance beyond the bridge, Alan stopped to read a sign. It said, absolutely, positively no dogs allowed in this garden. At the bottom it was signed, Abdul Ghasazi, retired magician. Behind the sign stood a vine-covered wall with an open doorway. Alan took the warning quite seriously. He turned to leave, but as he did, Fritz gave a tremendous tug and snapped right out of his collar. He bolted straight ahead through the open door with Alan running right behind. Okay, I could stop here again, right, and make a conclusion cloud because I'm thinking that something bad's going to happen to Fritz. But we'll wait and do another one a little bit later. I'm thinking that because absolutely positively no dogs, and he escaped. Fritz, stop, you bad dog, cried Alan, but the dog simply ignored him. Down shadowed paths and across sunlit lawns they raced, deeper and deeper into the garden. Finally, Alan drew close enough to grab hold of Fritz. But as he reached out, he slipped and fell. Fritz barked with laughter as he galloped out of sight. Alan slowly picked himself up. He knew he had to find Fritz before Mr. Ghasazi discovered him. Bruised and tired, he hurried off in the dog's direction. Getting more nervous. After a long search, Alan was ready to give up. He was afraid he might never find Fritz. But then he came upon fresh dog prints. Now that's something in the story that's a good clue. If they're fresh dog prints, if I can point to that in the text, then I know I'm thinking that Fritz has been there. Slowly, he followed Fritz's tracks along a path that led into a forest. The dirt path ended and a brick walk began. There were no more tracks to follow, but Alan was certain that Fritz must be just ahead. Alan was drawing a conclusion himself because he had seen those dog prints and then they disappeared, but they disappeared because there wasn't any more dirt, right? Okay, look at this house. Wow. Alan started running. In front of him, he could see a clearing in the forest. As he came dashing out of the woods, he stopped as quickly as if he had run up against a wall. For there, in front of him, stood a truly awesome sight. It was the house of Ghasazi. Alan nervously climbed the great stairs, convinced Fritz had come this way and had been captured. What do you think? You could stop right here yourself and make a conclusion cloud if you want to do that. Maybe you can pause the video and do it. You can send your teacher a picture. The boy's heart was pounding when he arrived at the huge door. Okay, that's another thing we could do is we could draw a conclusion about the way someone's feeling. Because the author didn't tell us that Alan was feeling a certain feeling. He told us that his heart was pounding. And we know that he also thinks that Fritz has been captured. And so what does that make us think? He's real nervous, right? Maybe even scared. He took a deep breath and reached for the bell. But before he touched it, the door swung open. There in the shadow of the hallway stood Gesazi the Great. "Greetings, do come in," was all that he said. Whew. Alan followed Gesazi into a large room. When the magician turned around, Alan quickly apologized for letting Fritz into the garden. He politely asked that if Mr. Gesazi had Fritz, would he please give him back? The magician listened carefully and then, smiling, said, "Certainly, you may have your little Fritzy. Follow me." With those words, he went to the door and led Alan back outside. Do you think he's being kind? This would be another great spot to stop and do a conclusion cloud. They were walking across the lawn when suddenly Gesazi stopped by a gathering of ducks. He began to speak in a voice that was more like a growl. "I detest dogs. They dig at my flowers. They chew on my trees. Do you know what I do to dogs I find in my garden?" "What?" whispered Alan, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I turn them into ducks." Do you think Fritz is one of those ducks? In horror, Alan looked at the birds in front of him. When one duck came forward, Gesazi said, "There's your Fritz." Alan begged the magician to change Fritz back. "Impossible," he answered. "Only time can do that. This spell may last years, or perhaps just a day. Now take your dear bird and please don't come again." Uh-oh. What do you think Miss Eunice is going to say? I think that was her name, Miss Eunice. I might have that wrong. When Alan took the bird in his arms, it tried to give him a bite. "Good old boy," said Alan sadly as he patted the bird on the head. "You really haven't changed so much." With tears in his eyes, he started for home. Behind him, Alan could hear Gesazi laughing. As he approached the stairway, a gust of wind took Alan's hat, sailing right off his head. Do we think this is Fritz, or do we not think this is Fritz? Do we have a clue? Okay, let's see. Running along with one arm reaching for the hat, Alan lost his hold on Fritz. The duck flew ahead and grabbed the hat in midair. But instead of landing, he just kept on flying higher and higher until he disappeared into the afternoon clouds. Uh-oh, now he's completely gone. Miss Hester. I got it wrong. I think she was going to see Miss Eunice. Alan just stood and stared at the empty sky. "Goodbye, old fellow," he called out sadly, sure that Fritz was gone forever. At least he had something to, At least he had something to chew on. Slowly, one step after another, Alan found his way back to the garden gate, and over the bridge. It was sunset by the time he reached Miss Hester's. Lights were on, and he knew she must be home. With a heavy heart, he approached the door, wondering how Miss Hester would take the news. What do you think? I mean, if it were my Cooper, I would not be very happy. I would be very, very sad. When Miss Hester came to the door, Alan blurted out his incredible story. He could barely hold back the tears. Then, racing out of the kitchen, dog food on his nose, came Fritz. Alan couldn't believe his eyes. "I'm afraid Mr. Gesazi played a trick on you," said Miss Hester, trying to hide a smile. "Fritz was in the front yard when I returned. He must have found his own way home while you were with Mr. Gesazi. You see, Alan, no one can really turn dogs into ducks. That old magician just made you think that duck was Fritz." Okay, so what do we think here? Can we make a conclusion, Cloud? What do you think? I think the author has given us clues that it was Fritz, the duck was Fritz, or that the duck wasn't Fritz, right? So I think you could make a choice there. So if I put right here, and I'm not going to do this one because I want to wait until the very end. if I put right here that the duck was Fritz for my clues, I could put he grabbed Alan's hat. That was his favorite thing, right? And, he was there when Alan got there. And ducks can fly, right? So I'm going to add a little scientific knowledge there that I know that ducks can fly. So maybe he flew home. But I could say right here, the duck wasn't Fritz. And I could say he's at home and no one can turn dogs into ducks. So that I could do that one either way, right? So I wanted to say that because this part, this is your thinking, okay? But you've got to be able to have some clues from the text. It's got to go with the text. It's got to make sense, okay? You can't just say that Fritz was a eagle, right? Or that he was still a dog, but he flew home, right? You can't just say something that completely doesn't make sense. It's got to make sense with the story. But we're going to, actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and put my thinking in there, but I'm going to put my clues in just a minute. I think that the duck was Fritz. Fritz was the duck. That's what I think. I'm going to put that in my thinking cloud. Okay. And my main clue right now is that not Fritz. I'm going to even just mark that out. The duck took Alan's hat. That was the first clue for me that the duck was Fritz, because that was one of his favorite things to do, right? Okay, let's read the next page. Alan felt very silly. He promised himself he'd never be fooled like that again. He was too old to believe in magic. Miss Hester watched from the porch as Alan waved goodbye and hurried down the road to go home. Then she called out to Fritz, who was playfully running around the front yard. He came trotting up the front steps with something in his mouth and dropped it at Miss Hester's feet. "Why, you bad dog," she said. "What are you doing with Alan's hat?" Okay, so that's the end of the story, right? The Garden of Abdul Basazi. I'm going to read that one again sometime. So I need to finish my conclusion cloud. I was thinking that Fritz was a duck. My first clue was that the duck took Alan's hat. And my second clue is that Fritz has Alan's hat. Okay, now, let me just point out that if you put right here that Fritz wasn't a duck, you could still say no one can turn dogs into ducks. And you could say that the duck could have dropped the hat there, right? So you could still think this and it would make sense, okay? So the thing is, put your thinking down, even if you think you might be wrong. Eventually put it down, because sometimes you just don't even find out the real answer because the author in this book doesn't even say. So it's just up to us to decide what we think at the end of this story. And that's the interesting thing about books, is that the author is not in control of what we think about the book. So we bring the meaning together. And we do that with drawing conclusions. So you'll have to let me know, what do you think? Do you think Fritz was a duck? Or do you think Fritz just ran home? All right. See you guys later.